Well, hello and welcome to the first episode of the Recruiter of Oz podcast. My name is Scott Smith, and I'm joined by my co host, Mark Tortorici. As a brief background, I've been a communications professional for the past 25 years, focusing largely on strategic analyst and public relations for a broad range of tech companies servicing numerous industries. Mark, why don't you provide a little bit of an overview of who you are?
Thank you, Scott. My name is
Over.
Mark Tortorici. Hello, everyone. I've been in the talent acquisition industry for many, many years now and worked for all kinds of different companies, agencies, corporate staffing environments, done individual contract sourcing and recruiting, and done it for almost every type of job out there, from placing registered nurses to hiring rocket engineers. So I've definitely seen it all, and definitely seen a lot of different economic times, ups and downs, like the one that we're currently experiencing. So ready to come on board and give some kind of like cool advice and kind of pull back the curtain of what really goes on with the recruitment side when you're not the recruiter.
And I think that's going to be particularly useful right now, especially in light of the recent deluge of tech sector terminations. We really wanted to create this series to help shed some light on the candidate recruiter relationship and address some of the main pitfalls and challenges candidates may experience during the job seeking process. So hopefully you'll find this content useful. As we go forward, we'll also be soliciting questions from the field, which can be sent via LinkedIn to either myself or Mark, or you can reach out to me by email at scott@arphilic.com. That's scott@arphilic.com. For our first episode, we're going to start at the beginning and hopefully provide you with a better understanding of why there might be so many layoffs right now. And Mark, as you and I, in addition to so many of our colleagues, have both felt the recent sting of corporate layoffs, it's become apparent that no one's really safe from them right now. That said, what do you think some of the major drivers of this wave are?
Yeah, this one's tough, but also, again, if you've been in the biz for as many years, you know that this is very cyclical. And so there was actually just a recent post that somebody did. I was just reading this news article, how they showed that the way that crops are harvested and the times of harvest and the years where the harvest is not good align almost perfectly with all of the stock market crashes since like the 1800s. Now there's like a huge now some people are like, well, this could be a correlation of like, just you're making sense, you're making the data make sense for you,
right?
But it lined up pretty nicely. And so not only that, because of this cyclical thing that happened, they could also predict when the next like giant spikes will be, and when the medium level spikes will be, and then when the serious downturns will be.
Oh, so basically, so are you gonna share those with us or what?
Yeah, I'll find it when you talk during the next question. But basically, the peak of everything for this last one was 2019, right. And then basically right now, 2023, we're at the very bottom.
Oh, great. So you're saying it's basically a 7 to 8 year cycle then. Is that what I'm getting from you?
Yes. And it does like these super giant peaks. Like the last peak before that, obviously was right before the whole like housing crash. And then, the last one before that, it peaked like in 99. And then you had your, .com crash. So it's like, it happens in these like forecasts, which people kind of know this already, but just to see it lined up with, in terms of like food production and harvest is like kind of bizarre to see that.
It does seem kind of bizarre. I mean, I wouldn't attribute a causal relationship to that. I'd maybe look at it as a correlation, but I'd be interested in kind of seeing how that lines up.
Yeah, I'll find it. But in terms of like why it's happening now, well, a couple of things. So we kind of went into in 2019, we're like, great, everything's great. We're like, we got our jobs, we're working. Then all of a sudden, right. 2020, everything goes haywire. We're all at home. Everyone's on their computers. And what that means is a lot more faces on computers, a lot more like, you have your captive audience, right. A lot more advertising eyeballs are on the computers. And so because of that, a lot more users, a lot more people door dashing, a lot more people like doing right. all that stuff. And so because of that, all these companies were like, hey, this is going to last forever. Let's just hire a bunch of people to support this. but
Exactly.
that it was never going to last forever. And pretty much every company hired thinking that it was going to last forever. And then after things started opening up and people started going like back to work and all this other stuff,
Hmm.
then you realize that you didn't actually need that many people in terms of employees, and the layoffs happened. And also in conjunction with that, less advertising eyeballs on computers means like less clicks, means advertising revenue is down. And now you really don't need that many people because you can't support paying them all. And so that's why we had all these layoffs that happened, beginning of last year and into this year.
So that's a great comment. It's something I'd like to kind of drill down into. But before we do, I think going back to the cyclical nature of these ebbs and flows is kind of interesting to me, because this was not something, this being COVID, was not something that we necessarily expected to happen. So did that create kind of an artificial ebb situation and put us off
It
cycle?
Yeah, it kind of did. I mean, we who knows how it would have been had we not had COVID, right? Because I mean, a lot of things did
Yeah.
go bad for people who were in COVID. It wasn't all good, obviously, right?
Right.
So because of that, it got rid of like some aspects of like business that you might have done outside, right? We had like homeschooling, you had like no more like events. If you're in the events business,
Sure.
your lives took a major hit there. But then again, you got to get more people in front of their computers. So it was like a weird kind of offset. But again, once it was over, once we got vaccinations and once things started opening up again, and also once companies were like, hey, you know what, we want you guys back here because we're
Yeah.
paying for these buildings and they cost a lot.
Right.
So that was really the biggest thing. And even with some companies like offloading some of their facilities and sites, they can't offload all of it, and even the ones that they kept, they're still expensive, and they have to like to pay for those buildings to run and to exist costs money, right? Their capital,
Absolutely.
their capex, right? That
Yes,
costs
indeed.
money.
But the thing is with that, it's also, in my opinion, a bit short-sighted on companies, on the company side, because basically you've set this precedent now that, hey, we're able to function and be productive from a remote situation. It doesn't have to be all in office. Yeah, there are those people who are gung ho, die hard. Hey, we need to collaborate. We need to see each other every day and have those conversations. Whereas there are a larger majority, from my experience, who are perfectly content sitting at home, doing what they need to do, having that quiet and able to pay attention and actually be part of what they're doing. And then when they have to take a meeting, cool, they can take a meeting from home. You can still do things like Zoom and WebEx. You see your coworkers. I mean, I don't necessarily need to smell what someone had for lunch to feel like I'm being collaborative, right?
No, that's true. And the some some companies like during while it was happening were like, hey, this is great, people can be at home, you really don't need to be in an office in order to get work done. And so there's
Right.
debates about that. For some people in like the recruitment industry specifically,
Hmm.
their teams were not in the office. I mean, my last company that I was at, my entire team, like I think only one person was actually in the Bay Area. Everybody else
Wow.
was spread throughout the country. So I mean, they don't have to be in the office.
Right.
Now there are some things that that you do have to be in person for, but it's like it's less than what companies think, and it's less than what like leaders think. I think the biggest thing that I think leaders are fearing is, besides that lack of cohesion, is also maybe candidates who are doing kind of like the double dipping, right? Not
Right.
candidates, I'm sorry, employees. They're doing like
Sure. Sure.
the double dipping, overworking, I guess it is, right?
Indeed.
So
And that's interesting too. I mean, so you've got a lot of news stories coming to light over the past couple of years, where you have the quiet quitting, the quiet hiring, the quiet firing. And that kind of plays into that. Is a candidate really bought into your mission and what you're trying to do? And if so, what are they doing to help advance that mission? Or are they just kind of doing the bare minimum? Kind of gets me to Office Space. So what would you say you do on a daily basis, you know?
exactly.
Um, and I think that's an interesting question, and it's been kind of telling to see what candidates end up doing and how they react to their given roles and how they work to either stay under the radar and just kind of coast by, or whether they're really trying to excel.
Well, if you look at their LinkedIn, if you have an employee and you look at their LinkedIn and you notice that your company is not on their LinkedIn profile, but they're working for you, that should be your first clue.
Yes, there is that. I'm going to go back a little bit though, and I think that something that we've really not touched on as much is that when you look at the situation right now, it may feel like doom and gloom, especially if you're in the tech sector and you've been victim to these layoffs, job cuts, eliminations. But really, I think, Mark, the key to kind of that concept is what you brought up earlier, is that when companies realized that COVID was going to kind of create this sea change and different needs for employees, um, companies started to panic and they started to fortify their workforce and make sure that they had enough resources to really do the job. So why don't we take a look at kind of the net effect of COVID in terms of the actual job numbers? Because I think it's important to call that out, because again, it's not all doom and gloom, right?
Right, that's true. And also a lot of the layoffs that have come, at least so far, have been in like they've been heavily weighted on the tech sector,
Right.
which, so it's that shows you one thing. Now, the tech sector, of course, is always the sector that grows the fastest first, right? And then
Mhm.
eventually like other industries kind of like follow just because of the way that they're built.
Right.
But also when it comes to layoffs, the tech sector is usually like the first to do layoffs, right?
Yes,
You're
they
not
are.
you're not hearing about layoffs like in, like as many layoffs in terms of like manufacturing,
Right.
right? Or healthcare or something like that. Now, that's not to say that it won't happen. That could very well happen, right? We could be hitting a full-blown recession. But the tech sector, it happens first.
Sure.
So
So the
that's,
tech
I think,
session, sorry for interrupting. So the tech sector is really kind of like a bellwether for the rest of the industries. And that's a
yeah,
little disconcerting for me, but yes, I get
yeah,
it.
exactly. Yeah, so I mean, like so basically all the companies that that I've, not all, but a lot of the companies that I've worked with, same thing. Like they're going through it. I mean, Amazon has been doing rounds of layoffs.
Mhm.
Microsoft is doing rounds of layoffs, I think for the entire year, I think is what they said.
Oh yeah, yeah, it's crazy. And
Yeah,
even beyond those, I mean, there's so many blue chip companies out there that are just course correcting and making sure that they're better. Or I guess we call it what, or you call it right sizing, to make sure that we're able to address all of the resource needs going forward for the next cycle. I think that my biggest problem as a job seeker and not being on the recruitment side and not having that insight is really kind of understanding why companies are knee jerking like this. Because to me, it looks like, okay, well, we need to keep the numbers up for our shareholders and our investors. We want to make sure that we're running lean and able to continue turning the profits that we were running. But I think that seems a bit short sighted from my perspective. What are you seeing with that? I mean, do you have a separate or kind of a different outlook on that, or?
yeah. I mean, it's hard for people to kind of like, I think for the average user, it's hard for them to understand like when a company is posting like some whatever bunch of money in profit, they're like, well, they're making all this money. Like, why are they doing a layoff, right?
Hmm.
But they don't understand like basic like budgeting and forecasting and like operating costs. Like a
Right.
company may make a certain amount of money, but the average user doesn't know how much it actually takes to run that company and to
Right.
pay those employees. I mean, think about it. Think about here. Let's just do a little math here.
Okay.
Let's take like let's say the average person in the tech sector makes like, we'll say $100,000.
Hmm.
We'll just guess. So that's $100,000. And now let's say you're going to lay off 1,000 people. Okay.
Right.
Okay. So, well, now you're talking 100 million dollars, right? So that's like
Sure.
you could like save all of that money by doing 1,000 person layoff, let's say.
Right. So really quickly now. So from my perspective, that okay, great. We're going to do that 1,000-person layoff of already trained workers. People that
Oh
the
yeah,
company has
yeah.
invested all of that money in
It's
training
bad.
and ramping up. And then, so what happens when on the other side of that coin, when we go back into the flow, all of a sudden that company has need for more resources to address and basically accommodate demand. What
Yeah.
happens then?
Yeah, so exactly. So if you look at it, so this goes back to your short-sighted kind of like vision of it. A company that like lays off, they're going to save, let's say, $100,000 for like maybe that year for that one
Right.
person, maybe 2 years if like they really do bad and they do nothing.
Mm-hmm.
But think about then once the role is open again, they have to hire somebody, but the cost to hire somebody, right? Well, to hire
Yeah.
somebody, um, you have to have like the operating costs to like post a job, to have the people there to support it, recruiting coordinators, recruiter,
Right.
maybe sourcer, right? And then you have the time that they're going to be working to put it in. So now you have like multiple people. Now, of course, they're not working that one job, but still they are working that job. So now you're factoring in the money that it takes to employ those people to find
Sure.
that one job that you laid off, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in hindsight, you would think, okay, well, then why don't we just keep them? But in terms of like surviving, like whatever the downturn, it makes more sense to just cut out the larger chunk of the salary and then just fire the machine back up again once it's time.
Really, you don't see that as kind of a wasted effort in terms of trying to re-ramp those new people up when you bring them back in, or it,
It's
wow.
it takes long. It depends on the job, and also it depends on the industry.
Okay.
Also, too, think about this. Within like my industry, within recruiting, we're the ones that are like usually first hired, but we're also the
Mm-hmm.
first ones to get fired.
Right.
So because of that, we are companies, I mean, they don't say this, but we're kind of treated as expendable, right? I mean, you can
Sure.
always find, recruiters like work for your company.
Right.
So because of that, they know that they can easily get rid of those and then bring them back once the economy starts like to be on the upswing, and then get
Sure.
them to hire and fill the positions that they need.
And then
So
fire them again, and repeat the
exactly.
process over and over again
Now,
in perpetuity.
good companies will kind of like plan out and budget, try and budget for this. But
Right.
even if you're still a good company or budgeting, intelligently, you still can't predict like some of the things that have happened. I mean, there have been just some weird things that have happened
Right. Right.
in the last few years. So yeah,
Yeah, and I don't envy you, man. I mean, really, being just the communications professional is kind of a boon for me at this point, because if I really had to be responsible for recruiting and sourcing, I think I'd be having a whole other range of stresses that I really wouldn't want to deal with. So thank you, sir, for taking one for the team. All right, everybody. So that was the first episode of the Recruiter of Oz podcast. I've been your host, Scott Smith, joined by my co-host, Mark Tortorici. I've been pronouncing his name wrong for 10 years. So apologies, Mark. Stay tuned for the next episode when we take a look at the candidate and kind of the candidate's eye into recruitment and vice versa, when we look at how to make sure your resume tells the right story. Until then,
yes.
we'll catch you on the next round.
All
Thank
right.
you.
See everyone.
See ya.